So hello, everybody. We're so pleased to welcome all of you today to this exciting event hosted by the Social Planning Council of York Region, the York Region Food Network, and the York Region Food Council. My name is Tara, and I'm here with my colleagues Yvonne Kelly, Chair of the Social Planning Council of York Region, Kate Gravett, the Executive Director of the York Region Food Network, and Morgan Sage, the Food Policy Coordinator at YRFN, also representing the York Region Food Council. Of course, we are welcoming our special guest, Joshna Maharaj, who will be properly introduced in just a bit. And we're really excited to bring these groups together to have an important conversation about meaningful solutions to the issues that matter to us all. And before I turn it over to Morgan, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. So although we're all connecting virtually right now, we encourage everyone to take a moment and acknowledge where we are each situated. For us at YRFN, we work on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and are part of the Williams Treaties and Treaty 13. We acknowledge the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation as our closest Indigenous community. We also acknowledge that many of our practices, including our organizational structure, the seeds we plant, the foods that we prepare, the ways we educate, and our methods of growing, harvesting, preparing, and sharing food came to these lands through the ongoing process of colonialism. We seek to hold this understanding in our interactions and engagements with this land and its peoples, as we are all treaty people and play a role in reconciliation. So now I'd like to turn it over to Morgan to do some housekeeping and introduce Joshna.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy you could all be here with us today. Without further ado, I will introduce our speaker, which I am very excited to have here today, Joshna Maharaj. She is a chef, a two-time TEDx speaker, and activist who wants to help everyone have a better relationship with their food. She believes strongly in the power of chefs and social gastronomy to bring values of hospitality, sustainability, and social justice to the table. Recently, Joshna has been working with hospitals and universities in Toronto to build new models for institutional food procurement, production, and service. Her first book is entitled Take Back the Tray, which I happen to have right here on my desk. It captures the lessons and experience from her work to create a shareable blueprint for changing institutional food systems around the globe. Joshna also hosts Kitchen Help Desk, a weekly call-in food show on CBC Radio, and she co-hosts a food and drink podcast called Hot Plate. So welcome, Joshna. We're really excited to have you here today, and I'll pass the mic over to you.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for this awesome invitation. And I have to say, for making space for this conversation, I am so excited that we are here and that we have this many people who are ready to start talking about food-based solutions for our post-COVID lives. Hello, everyone. Please put questions in the chat. We will we'll get through as many of them as we can, but let me get started here. I'll just share my screen with all of you. And off we go. Okay, so as you heard, a lot of the work that I do is really anchored in community food security, particularly in public institutions. I really believe that they are a bit of a last frontier for sort of a little good food revolution. And in my work, I've done 2 projects in 2 hospitals and 1 university. In the process, I have really discovered the incredible power of just some values and some new thinking around our food and the ability to actually take care of everybody really, really well. So this is what I'm going to offer up today. Whoops. Here we go. First up, just a run through of what we'll talk about. I want to just highlight some of the impacts of the pandemic and the lessons that we've learned, particularly about the food system. I want to talk a bit about good food policy and what that actually means for people. And then I'm going to walk you through a bit of the insights that I have gained in terms of the opportunity for values-based procurement, particularly food procurement in sort of public institutions and municipal contexts. And then of course our Q&A. So off we go. And I'm gonna just give you a bit of background information onto me and my sort of philosophy and idea about food, so you understand kind of my perspective. One of the things that I believe really, really strongly in is that any plate of food served anywhere reflects the values and the attitudes that created that plate of food, right? And like the plate doesn't lie, right? Anybody who understands food and can recognize what they're being given will be able to tell the story of that dish and of the attitude that made that dish, whether there was care and attention, whether it was made by human hands or a machine, what the ingredients were. All of that really compiles the attitude and the values. And that is the piece that I think that we need to pay more attention to. So, for example, we have two photos here. On the left is a farmer's market breakfast sandwich, and on the right is a cup of coffee through the window at a drive-through at Tim Hortons. Two bits of food, but with very different values behind them, right? The values behind that coffee at Tim Hortons is about things that are cheap and things that are fast. We're not necessarily focused on them being good, which is sort of evidenced when you eat that food, you can tell, right? We're not that focused on it being good, but we love that it happens cheap and quickly so that we don't even have to get out of our cars, right? So that is the value that's being exhibited there. To the left, we have a farmer's market sandwich made with likely ingredients sourced from the market or the farmers who were at that market. It probably took a longer time. Someone probably stood there for 5 or 6 minutes waiting for that to be finished, and it probably cost considerably more than the toasted bagel that came from the Tim Hortons drive-through window. But the attitude behind that breakfast sandwich is about local sourcing and integrity around how things were grown. The kind of flour that went into that bread has all been considered in a way that our friends at Tim Hortons are just not thinking about. And so this is the sort of framework that I like to build here, because the loud and clear, when I started my work in public institutions, it was sort of deafening when I'd look at all those plates and those trays of food, and I'd say, the attitude here is just the lowest possible price with the most minimal required investment, right, is sort of the guiding principle, and that is really part of the problem. So moving along, let's just really think about how, what the pandemic has taught us as we've been at, like, we're at 14 months now. And as things happened and news happened, I was sort of wildly grabbing screenshots and saving articles, because it's just incredible to watch the way the sort of vulnerabilities of our food system have revealed themselves. So let me walk you through a little bit of that. First up, this was a very familiar, although bizarre and curious vibe in grocery stores, right? The panic and the hoarding made us all sort of like wildly buy things. We bought things that we didn't even know what they were and how to cook them, but the panic and the obsession about the need to hoard food for an unknown, for unknown times ahead really sort of took us over, which is fascinating, right? So empty shelves, and this started us asking questions about our supply chain and about how quickly these shelves can in fact be replenished, and what is standing in the way of pulling all of that off, right? This is really the first time we saw this happen. And we all sort of learned about the fact that there are like 3 or 4 maybe national distribution chains of food and food supplies into the country. And when things get thick, when crisis hits, what happens, right? It's stuff like this. Next up, we really learned about the working and the impact of the industrial food system, right? We learned about what happens with monoculture crops, corporate farms, and the fact that they're not that able to pivot, right? They're not that able to change what they're doing. They're meant to grow a whole bunch of one thing because they have a market need. But when the market need changes, when we're all not walking around the street, walking around and stopping in for sandwiches and things like that, what happens, right? What is actually going on? And one of the things that I realized was that the sort of average person is not really that connected to the idea that there are in fact 2 food systems, that are available to them. The industrial food system is the most easily engaged, easily engaged with, but there is another option. And that I have been spending a lot of time kind of screaming and yelling about the fact that we are not bound to the terms and the context of the industrial food system, particularly because it's not actually serving us well at all. Then the government got in on it, right? We started seeing messages about encouraging people to stay home and cook and to spend time with your bread and watch videos and be with your people. And I thought it was so fascinating that the lure of staying at home and cooking was the thing that was potentially going to keep people, distanced and in their homes. The momentum on the home cooking was something that really warmed my heart. And early days when we didn't know how long this was going to last, I was waiting and hoping, because there's the idea that it takes 21 days to build a new habit. And so I thought naively, I was like, please let this last at least 21 days so that all these new habits can be built. Now, clearly, much more than 21 days have passed. And I think we've really seen some interesting truth about kids' capacity in the kitchen, and people have learned a lot, right, about being at home and cooking at home. And that to me has been wildly exciting. Next up is shortages, right? We had lots of product shortages. The flour, right, was one thing that was a huge deal. And that really, this is obviously a bread production line that's not necessarily very modern, but the idea that we've sort of had a blind eye to this production, right? The bread is always there when we want it, and we don't really ask any more questions. But our hoarding and the sort of collective buy really revealed what was going on in these places and what the systems are that exist. And that to me is super helpful, because the ignorance is not going to help us build a better future, right? So really understanding the systems and how they work, particularly in moments of crisis, have been really, really, highlighted here. Now, on a more individual basis, food insecurity has been a thing that has skyrocketed, as can be expected, right? Because the minute jobs are lost and people aren't earning wages, your food budget is your first expendable budget line, because you can't pay half of your rent, right? You got to pay all your rent, and the next biggest chunk of your budget is on your food. So what we're seeing right here is a car lineup of people waiting for a food bank in the US. And this blew my mind, right? This was more than a year ago already, right? And within the first 6 weeks of the pandemic, this is what we started seeing. And that makes my heart race with a bit of panic, right? That many people needing food is intense. These are some gorgeous meals that are put out by my friends at The Stop. The Stop is a very dear place to me. I was the chef there for 5 years. And I've been sort of keeping a really close eye on how they've been doing through the pandemic. And I'm so delighted that this team has just really kept up the consistency with putting out gorgeous looking meals like this. They are usually they do around 200 lunches a day. And I've heard reports of 350, 400 lunches, because as time passes, the rates of food insecurity are spiking. And the fact that they are able to still get this fresh, beautiful, wholesome food out to people, obviously all takeout style now, because no dining programs can run indoors. But it's just to see the ripple, the trickle down of all of this. One of the curious things that we heard too from farmers was that because they weren't selling to restaurants and their usual trips to market, their routes to market were altered, a lot of donations happened to places like The Stop. And so my friends at The Stop talked about being able to serve community members some of the most beautiful, organic, locally grown food ever, because of this sort of crazy circumstances with farmer donations. An interesting twist, right? To see that really vulnerable people actually got some beautifully nutritious food inside of them. And that is encouraging for me. Next up is this potato and dairy dumping, right? These were two pieces. This is this is Idaho, if you can believe it. And just because we were not out eating fries, right? It's specifically about fries, which is so fascinating. And to see that in moments like this, even with supply management, which is what we have happening here in Canada, these mountains are a bit inevitable, right? As soon as our behavior changes, this is the impact and this is the result. And the interconnectedness of this is something that we have all been quite blind to, right? Because we all were like, oh my God, what's happening? What's this all about? Not really connecting that when our behavior changes, there's a ripple impact that is almost infinite, right? And in terms of how it rolls out. And to think about how farmers manage this, right? And how nimble systems are to sort of make change and get the word out about come and grab as many potatoes as you can get your hands on. What are the systems? Do they exist? Do they not exist? How can they be better are some of the questions that we're starting to ask. And finally, let's talk about meat packing, right? These are some highlighted ideas about the outbreaks at meat packing facilities, both in Canada and in the US. And one of the things that is so important here is that the issue around meatpacking, particularly with the pandemic and with COVID, is that it's about an unsafe workplace, right? This is not about the meat itself. This is about the working conditions for these folks in these places, right? And you see now there's these weird little pieces of plastic that are being hung up between folks, and some degree of increased PPE is being offered. But it's really just to see that there is the same kind of trickle down in damage from the industrial food production that goes beyond just producing food that is not as nutritious for us, or as as damaging to the planet. It's also damaging to the people who have to do these jobs and work in these places. And that, I'm very glad for this to be highlighted, because it was a bit of it was too quiet, let's say, perhaps before. Now, ironically, and in the madness of all of this, is simultaneously as meatpacking plants are being shut down and paused because of outbreaks, right? Hamburger recipes were the most searched recipes in every state in the US during quarantine. Hamburger recipes. That kind of, when you think, so there's an increased demand for ground beef because everybody was at home learning how to make burgers. So meatpacking facilities boosted their production, thus forcing more workers into increasingly dangerous places, right? In dangerous circumstances. And the cycle of that is insane, right? And it's just so wild to imagine that these two things were happening at the same time, in a little like left hand, right hand, not quite knowing about each other. You know what I mean? And that is it's just fascinating to observe our behavior this way. So what have we learned from the pandemic? One, industrial food production is not only unsustainable, it is not nimble and cannot pivot quickly. Two, our relationship with our food needs work. But many good food connections were made in quarantine. And that is really exciting, right? We have to invest in our food, but once we did that, I think a lot of people saw beautiful connections made, right? While this didn't necessarily happen for everybody, but for those who it did, I believe some lives are forever changed, and some people, you know what I mean? Nourishment and food security and deeper connections have been made. Third is, whether we realize and acknowledge it or not, we are connected to each other. Our actions have a ripple effect on others. I think this might be the biggest lesson of this whole thing, is that whether we see it, whether we appreciate it, whether we value and nurture it, doesn't matter, because it exists. And in moments of crisis, it is really crucial that we have this knowledge and this network, right? Because, as I have here in the fourth piece, there is incredible potential and power in communities on the ground to take care of themselves, right? One of the things I noticed as I was doing a bit of a soup and sweets pickup for some folks here in Toronto was that the future is about smaller communities of people who really care about each other, right? It's grassroots communities, it's people on the ground mobilizing and looking around to see who's there, what do they need, what can we do? That is where our strength and our power is, right? This is not something, the change that I think we need to see is not at all something we need to wait for government to get connected to and then trickle down some nonsense to us. This is about grassroots communities activating themselves, figuring out what they need to take care of everybody well, and just building a system that works. Because the planet will burn up while we wait for government to really pay attention. So let's just think, so now what, right? How do we focus ourselves on this and on this sort of new idea? And I want to just stop for a moment on this slide and this message about how food is the way we receive nutrients from the earth. I was planting seeds one March in just little egg cups here in my apartment, and a farmer pal was visiting me, and she just casually, as I was doing this, she casually said this, she gave me this line: food is the way we receive nutrients from the earth. And I was like, what are you talking about, woman? I had never considered that, right? I had never considered the fact that there was nutrition inside of the earth that I as a human needed to stay alive, and that the food that we eat is the delivery mechanism of that, right? Of course, it makes perfect sense, but my mind had not gone there. And that sort of changed everything for me, right? Because then I understood exactly sort of what the point of food is, right? The point of food is to keep us alive and to connect us to our own life force. And that is the thing that I like, No conversation about food, no plate of food, no dish of food can get too far away from the idea that our relationship with food is about staying alive. And I think that when we have that, it forces us to value food more. It forces us to care about it more, and hopefully to prioritize it and to build systems to maximize everyone's access to it. So here's a little bit of wisdom for one of my favorite ladies. This is Vandana Shiva, who's a very loud, powerful advocate for a good food revolution. And she says, all transformation comes from the joy of the thought of the better state. So it's about imagining a future that will serve everybody well, and then working towards building that future. It just seems so tidy and simple with her nice smile. But there's wisdom there, and this is something that I have kept close to me, to just keep painting the idea, of the future and what the future could look like. So what happens when we invest in food? And forgive this slide with American dollars in it, please, friends. How do we do this? And this is when things start getting really exciting. So I learned from my dear friends at the Toronto Food Policy Council. Early on in my career, I was at a meeting and they floated this idea, which is not new, but that because food is our deep common denominator as humans, good food policy will have a ripple impact on sort of every other area of our lives. Meaning, if we invest in good food policy with all sort of the values that we can articulate, that automatically will create good health policy, good labor policy, good agriculture policy, right? If we grow food well, the land will be cared for. People will get paid fairly. They will eat really good quality foods. Their health outcomes will change. We will have communities collecting around food to strengthen culture. Kids will learn different things with their engagement in their food, right? And that's how education will boost. And then obviously we'll just take better care of the land and the people who work it. But to me, this is a really key piece, right? And in context like this, it gets kind of floated around as new hippie ideas. But the truth is, this is actually how all of our cities and our sort of civilizations were built. It was built around access to food. Food was the most important. It was where the waterways were for things to come from a port or on a ship, or a milk, a milk delivery through streets. Our streets and the way that our cities were organized were all about access to food. And so really this is about kind of reanimating a bit of an older thought, obviously with the flavor and the context of our current time. But I do believe that this works. I have employed this model in public institutions, sort of on a smaller scale, when I'm trying to rework the culture of a hospital or a university. And I see that if we start with food and we anchor in really good food policy, obviously we have to determine what that actually means. But when we do that, it opens up so much other possibility because of that beautiful interconnected ripple effect that I was talking about before, right? Just focus on the food and everything else can really take care of itself. I have a dream that at some point our PM will realize that a food minister, a ministry of food, is what is required. And the minister to run that, the person to run that ministry needs to be somebody who's incredibly engaging because they need to have relationships with all the other ministers, right? A food portfolio needs to be different because it does encompass so many things, right? And trade is included here. Business is included. This is not just sort of everybody have a lentil soup under a tree kind of situation. We understand how we're moving the money around, and we're thinking more consciously about how we're using the money and where we're investing it to nurture something really intentional. So following from this, I'm going to just walk you through sort of how these values can find themselves in our daily lives, right? And so what I'll do here is I'm going to walk you through values-based procurement principles. And these were ones that we developed while I was working on a project at Ryerson University. I had 2.5 years as the director of food services there to really rethink the culture of food on that campus, and to really think about how we were spending our money, where we were buying food from, and what the role of an institution, and particularly institutional food purchasing, can actually mean for the food system. So here we go. These are some of the more high-level things that we learned. So first up is about building relationships. We made a connection with 100 Kilometer Foods. They're a local distributor and they provide access to products from, now this is 60, but I think they're close to 75 or 80 small family farms in Southern Ontario. This is crucial because they're a distributor who shares my values, right? I trust them completely to make great decisions, and they offer assistance because no institutional food purchaser or no procurement officer will have the capacity or the time to start building relationships with individual farmers, right? Getting a farmer on the phone is not an easy thing to do for really good reasons, but let's figure out a way to make this work. So having a distributor who shares your values, who is looking to actually open up markets for small family farms is a really key piece. And these folks we've been allies and now dear friends for many, many years. And to watch them grow is incredible. So this is the vibe. This young guy's, the delivery guy, these are salad greens that have come from the new farm in Creemore. That's David on the right, who was our catering chef. Who would receive these gorgeous salad greens and use them in our meals, in our lunches, and in our catering. But to have this beautiful weekly connection and the excitement about the salad greens was a really, really beautiful thing. And this is how we were, this is how we started being able to pull this sort of new idea off. Other pieces were really about connecting our staff to the farms and to this new sourcing piece. You'll see later we actually take the staff on trips, but this was Ming run, and you'll see I think she's tasting sunflower sprouts, right? But just to take a moment, she is part of the team that assembled sandwiches and yogurt parfaits and that sort of thing. But this was a new green that we added into that program, and to take a minute and pause and let the whole team taste the sunflower sprouts and talk about the nuttiness and the smoothness and the crunchiness. And then they're gonna, then they'll make the salad using these ingredients. We'd order an extra flat of strawberries so everybody could get a beautiful juicy taste, because is there anything more exciting than when the strawberries are ready? This is these connections with the people on the ground and the people who bring us the food really opened up what we were able to do. So next piece is really talking about leveraging institutional purchasing power. So when I was at Ryerson, we had a catering business, as most institutions do. And one of the most popular things were sweets platters and fruit platters, right? All over the place. Sweets platters were always being made when I'd walk through the kitchen. And the cookies on the sweets platter were these giant things that were like underbaked to seem chewy, but they tasted incredibly artificial. And I would always see them broken in half, and people would take half and leave half on the platter. But we all know that nobody's going to pick up that half. And so this was a waste. So I got on the phone with the supplier. I said, hey, this is what's happening. Can you just make me a smaller cookie? They were like, oh, the machine doesn't really work. It only can do one thing. So essentially their answer was, no, we can't. We just make one cookie and that's it. So I thought that was ridiculous. And I called my friend Andrea, who is a baker, who has a shop at Broadview and Gerard. And I said, here's how much I'm spending. I need a better cookie. I need a smaller cookie. What can you do? She showed up 2 days later with 5 options, including one dreamy gluten-free thing. And we were able to really support her business, right? So the first order was about 500 cookies that we got. That boosted to about 1,000 cookies a week that were on catering platters, right? And because these cookies were so good and they were smaller, they were eaten, and all the extras were wrapped up in napkins and shoved in people's pockets. There was no more waste, right? They weren't being returned. And the culmination of all of this was convocation, when we had that literally thousands of students and their parents on site for little receptions and stuff. We, in the course of, I think, 10 to 14 days, placed orders for 10,000 cookies. And we, on Andrea's Instagram feed, were photos of her son and her son's girlfriend and everybody rolling cookie batter and packing boxes into the truck with lots of excitement about the fact that these were headed to Ryerson. And isn't it awesome that this is the way that works, right? Also, I'd go to the farmer's market, and the vendor who sells the horizontally traded chocolate and the person who sells the flour also would grab me and hug me and say thank you, because they saw the boost in an order of their product because Andrea was now buying so much of it to make cookies for us, right? So the point is, I did not spend any more money on these better cookies, but I was able to use that, it was 66 cents a cookie that I was spending. I was able to use that 66 cents to nurture so many more elements on the food chain, right? To keep this woman, she took a vacation, she bought some equipment, do you know what I mean? To upskill her shop and her staff. And the president was like, thank you very much, because he was delighted that the university was in the paper and all of these nice things were happening. But it was a small, just because I wanted the money to be spent with some value behind it, we were able to really open a beautiful opportunity. So much so that a local paper caught wind of it. And this piece here, this is the wisdom. By ordering from small Toronto area businesses and suppliers to fill the bellies of students and staff, Ryerson University is supporting the local economy and serving better cookies, right? This is the thing. With food, we have the unique opportunity of a win-win-win-win, right? There are not many scenarios in which that happens, but with food, it definitely does. You can build a system and you can structure things so that everybody benefits along the way. It really is that possible. And once you want to do it, it's not that hard. Third principle is getting quality food on campus. So we partnered with Monforte Dairy. They produce beautiful cheese in Stratford, Ontario, and Ruth Clausen is at the helm, and she's a dear friend and ally. And it was effortless, the decision to use Monforte, because we made so many cheese platters and all of that stuff for the catering business. Her product is gorgeous and beautiful. She shares our values, and it was wonderful to be able to support her, right? I remember walking into the walk-in for the catering fridge and seeing wheels and wheels and wheels of Ruth's cheese. And I said to David, our catering chef, I was like, are you sure we can afford this? Can we really pull this off? And he said, yeah, the numbers work. We can do this. We're serving this for fancy dinners and all of that. And again, Ruth was like, my God, seeing this monthly order from Ryerson has allowed me to, keep my head above the water and exhale and know that that there is money coming in with some, consistency and regularity. And students get beautiful plates like this. This is all locally sourced stuff. These are beautiful. I think these are downy potatoes, those same salad greens that you saw. And you can't really see it, but there is a beautiful slice of Ruth's cheddar cheese on this burger. And so again, with the win-win-win-win, we are using our values to purchase. We're paying farmers and producers a fair price for what they're doing. And we are opening up delicious, beautiful food for all of the people on the campus. It really can work that way.
Joshna, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to give you a soft 10-minute time check for you.
Thank you. So the fourth piece is a focus on scratch cooking. For me, that was non-negotiable, right? The idea that the Joshna dream on how institutional food change needs to happen is anchored in the idea that it's about scratch cooking, right? It's food made from scratch by somebody who cares about you a little bit, right? On site every day. That is just it. That was non-negotiable. And I will stand by that. And so all of the projects that I worked on were focusing on upskilling and reskilling a lot of the cooks so that they had skills, right? So that they were nimble enough to be able to take advantage of a bumper harvest crop, or to use things up in the fridge really thoughtfully. And so the scratch cooking also allowed us to use a wider breadth of local ingredients. So Jason Purcell's family produces gorgeous cold pressed oils in Waterford, but he had an incredible fryer oil even. And because we cooked from scratch, we were able to purchase these things because we sauteed raw, we sauteed onions and garlic and that sort of thing. And we opened up our kitchen capacity to be able to use his beautiful oil. And to see him feel the impact of that bulk order starting because I had 4 big kitchens across that campus, all of whom were now using this particular oil. We got beautiful oil, he got regular sales, and Ontario farmers are a little bit stronger as a result. And look, the other piece, and honestly, this is the stuff that I didn't really connect to. This is Rosie and Alan, 2 of our cooks in the Ryerson kitchen. But for them, it was the joy of being able to work with these beautiful ingredients, right? Institutions are not always desirable places for chefs to work because they don't feel like they get to make really good food. But if you change that game and you bring this beautiful local food in, these become some of the best cooking jobs anywhere. And that was very exciting. The labor opportunity there, because their creative spirit was required, but they also had job security and a uniform allowance and paid vacation, which, if you know anything about the life of chefs, is not a real thing, right? That's really a very scarce commodity, a very scarce thing. And finally, flexibility. So we made Brian Gilvesi is a wonderful farmer who raises Texas Longhorn cattle in Tilsonburg. It's 100% grass-fed beef, beautiful, lots of lessons. He has a gorgeous kind of setup with pollinator garden and all kinds of beautiful things on his farm. And I took the team for a visit to the farm to observe this, to learn from Brian, and to get connected to the idea of naturally raised meat. Now, the thing is, Brian sells exclusively to restaurants, and every month he sort of does an order and a call. One month he called us and said he had beef cheeks and strip loins that he hadn't moved for the month, and he wondered if we might be able to use them, and if so, he could give us a discount, right? Because in order for institutions to afford food, we cannot do this on the backs of our farmers, right? Expecting farmers to offer discounts is really not the right or appropriate way to do this. If an institution can earn the discount somehow by offering him the chance to clear his house every month, and that he offers us a discount for that stuff, but we take what it is off of his hands because we had freezer space to store it. I had a nimble team of cooks who could actually do lovely things with the strip loins and the beef cheeks. And again, we have a win-win-win-win situation that allowed us to produce this gorgeous carpaccio for an honorary doctorate dinner, right? It's if we can earn the discount, and if we can offer value to a farmer, then it makes sense, right? Then it actually works, and it's not just about a sort of discounted charity type model. Okay, so final thoughts on all of this is here's what I know for sure. Food is our life force. Food is a source of joy and connection. Food builds healthy communities. And food is a powerful tool for social change. All of these things are true. My work for the last 15 years has really been evidence of all of this. But the key piece here, and the thing that I'm excited about being here today to talk to you about, is that this is all true, but these are things that we have to choose, right? This will not happen automatically. We have to decide that the way we did things before is no longer viable, suitable, effective, right? On the table. New things are on the table, and that we have to choose that our values need to be more alive in the working of our food system, and that we want everybody in our community to have access to this food to keep themselves alive and nurture their families and just, you know what I mean, stay living and whole. We have the power here. And so I know that this conversation is the beginning of other conversations that hopefully will spurn from this. And I'm so excited to be a part of it. We're going to move to questions now. And of course, there's lots more to talk about, but thank you for your time and attention. And let's move over to our lovely friends here. I'll stop the share because I think some of you will put your cameras on, which is very exciting. Thank you, friends.
Joshna, I don't know what to say. That was incredible. We could see a lot of people commenting in the chat as you presented.
Awesome. Okay.
Are we good?
Yep.
And I just wanted, to thank you again for elevating this conversation. We knew that you were the right person to help us make sense of and really concretize steps that we can take to realize a just recovery utilizing food, and all the opportunities that come with that. Because I think we all want to create access to diverse, healthy, and locally sourced food, but also create good jobs in the sector. And I think that's why, again, this dovetails so well, all of what you said today with the work that we're doing on reimagining a just recovery. Awesome. So thank you. And we have some questions, and I hope people will raise their hands if they have any questions and share. First question is from Heather, and it's an expanded question. So can we talk about strategies for how to access foods for public school breakfast programs where budgets are limited and food handling needs to be very simplified? especially during COVID. So any kind of comments on school food programs?
Yes, for sure. They definitely need to be included here in a more structured, managed, resourced way. Right now, this is just the kindness of teachers and parents and volunteers who are, throwing money and their time and effort at the situation. I do believe that if we make closer connections to farmers, to find out the things that are potentially not getting to market. A great example is when I was working in hospitals, they had apple slices in a plastic bag that they would put on the tray. And I was like, how about we just put an apple on the tray? Right? Instead of the weird chemical in the plastic, and this is ridiculous. So I called our supplier, got apples. They were too big, dietitians, portion size, too much. So we called back and I said, can we talk to Tori Warner, was the farmer in Niagara. Does he have smaller apples? As it turns out, Tori had number 3s that are just like 3 and 4 bites. Too small for what the market needs, perfect for hospital trays. Right? He was very happy to move the apples because they otherwise would have gotten tilled or sent for feed or pet food or something like that. He sold us those apples at an incredibly affordable rate. We got beautiful, rightly sized small apples for patients. And it was a very tidy exchange. And I am quite sure that these kinds of connections can also be made for school programs, right? And my friends at FoodShare actually are doing a lot of this. They have really cornered the market on pulling those tiny apples out for little ones, for their in-school snacks. But I think that the way to open up access here without needing a major budget investment, which for the record we do need, is to make these deeper connections directly with farmers or distributors to figure out what food supply, what food ingredients exist that are not perhaps exactly what the market is asking for. I think there's huge opportunity there, at least to start that project.
Thank you for that. And I think, given the breadth and depth of the folks that we have at this event today, who are probably really inspired and thinking a lot about what you've said, we have the farming community, we have the Food Network who has the connections. So when we're talking about institutions needing to build those connections with farmers, those are things that are already possible and can happen. And we have folks who have expressed an interest in starting their own local catering company, offering diverse foods, which we realized throughout the pandemic was a real challenge. Emergency food, but not food that was culturally appropriate food or food that people would eat. And so that's another piece. We have a comment here, and I'm just going to read it. I love the idea of connections with farmers. It's a post-COVID endeavor for sure. It was very disconcerting to only have prepackaged food during this time. But that's what was mandated at the time. So a bigger question that people have been asking as we led up to this event is, where would you start? And this will probably be part of a next conversation where we dive deeper into what does that look like for larger institutions, and where do we start to really build an infrastructure around food in York Region that can actually access those social procurement dollars that are already being spent. They're already being spent on food, maybe not the best food. Where would we start to kind of bring some of those larger institutions into the conversation?
It's the real challenge with this step in the process is that not all institutions are in the same place, right? Particularly hospitals, right? Because of the last sort of 30 years worth of incremental budget cuts that everybody has had to withstand, bear. Not everybody, some places actually have kitchens. Other places have surrendered their kitchens for, retherm boxes and outsourced production and service. And so finding a solution that works for everybody is almost impossible, which is, I think, part of the reason why we haven't really tackled this one yet, right? Because it is messy and complicated. And so what I usually I have like a bit of an intake triage kind of process that I go through to be like, okay, do you have the capacity to cook food on site? If no, then we know that other things need to be diverted to you, right? And if we start thinking about, where we can actually start speaking to farmers, figuring out what it is that they have that they need to move and to connect to communities, then we can say, okay, these institutions actually have kitchens, they can cook, so raw ingredients can be sent in this direction. This set of, kitchens don't have the capacity, they need prepped or easy, to serve. They have fridges, but they have no stoves. And it's a little bit of that kind of play that's required. But once you do it and you lay down a system, off we go, right? And then it grows. Okay, so now this farmer is driving into the city to deliver these things. What else can be done? Or, how else can we utilize the fact that there, those moves are being made? I think it's a slow set of steps, but I do believe that the first move is to get people who are ready to make change. These are people with some power in their organization to actually start changing the way things are done around a table, and to do a little triage of what people's needs and capacities are. And then we go from there. Unfortunately, it's not super tidy because everybody is in a different place. So the way I see it is that this needs to be a broad continuum, right? With multiple points of entry, depending on where people are. And my job and the job of organizers is to help everybody just get their feet turned in the same direction for the future, right? That's really what our task is right now.
Thank you, Joshna. And I think it goes without saying that anything worth doing is usually a bit messy. No cookie cutter approaches, no pun intended.
Sadly, no.
So we have a question from Nina, and this could go to you and maybe also to Kate and the Food Network folks. Thanks for the fantastic presentation. Can you share about existing partnerships with farmers in York Region that we have, yourself or the Food Network? And do we have individual connections, or do we go through associations? So if you want to start with that, Joshna, and then Kate, if you want to.
My York Region farm connections are minimal. I actually just had a lovely chat with the folks at Clearwater Farm because I'm working with a seniors space. But I think maybe Kate is a better person to answer this because she'll have more information about the region specifically. I don't know enough about that.
Okay. Great.
Thanks, Kate.
Welcome, Kate.
And yeah, York Region Food Network, we work through many associations, and I know some of our farmer connections are on the call as well.
Oh, amazing.
We do have some connections with York Federation of Agriculture, York Farm Fresh as well, and then there's a handful of farmers that we have a gleaning program with as well, so we touch base with on an annual basis and explore opportunities.
Amazing.
Great, thanks, Kate. Tara.
Yes, hi, Joshna. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think there's so many things in there that move all of us coming from different parts of the sector. Particularly, I found what you said about mobilizing the grassroots instead of waiting for a government response was really inspiring, because at Reimagining a Just Recovery, we're trying to bring together as many voices as possible in the nonprofit sector in advocacy for causes that we've all been working to support for a really long time. I was just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit more. And yeah, and then I might have a follow-up question too, but for now, I think that would be great.
I think that there's huge potential. I see it in the work that I do here, and particularly in the pandemic, to see that the grassroots food organizations were the ones who were ready to meet people's needs, right? They were ready to change, to reconfigure spaces to make it safe for people to move in and out. They were the ones saying, okay, look, while you're in here, you're going to need access to these other things. So while you're in line, let's get you connected to healthcare stuff or housing stuff, or right. It's just on the ground, community organizations really understand that where there is food, there is people, and that is how we can organize, right? It is to food every program, right? Every worthwhile community program, I think, offers people some food, right? And offers people, because that's what pulls people in, right? And so we see this between organizations here like Food Share, the Stop, our friends at Sistering. They're all food-based organizations that were able to connect with each other and work together to develop something of an immediate response, and to do things like lobby for assistance, for crisis assistance or for funding for PPE so that staff could continue, getting food out in a safe way to people. I don't know that we would have made it through this without these smaller regional neighborhood connections, right? I've been so proud, like if I can say that I'm proud or just encouraged by watching my colleagues and the way that they just saw what are able to see what's happening around them and respond almost immediately.
That's brilliant. And I'll just add, when we started meeting around food cluster emergency planning tables when COVID struck with United Way in the region, and it was incredibly helpful to be able to plan and network that way. But a lot of the smaller groups that some of us knew of weren't there because they just simply weren't known about or hadn't been receiving funding in that typical way. So again, they've really raised the bar and brought people through this. And I know a lot of them have aspirations to do something in a much more ongoing, continual basis, such as we're talking about today. I'm gonna go to Niv from Northern Georgina. Niv, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Joshna. Wonderful to see you. I'm a big fan of your show on CBC.
Oh, thank you.
And I wanted to chat because we have a group of agencies that are working on a local catering collective initiative in Northern York Region. Okay. And our intention is to bring fresh, local, affordable, and home-cooked meals to people at affordable prices. And my question to you is, we're hoping that this catering collective is resident driven, and in areas such as Northern York Region where people are marginalized for various reasons, including, physical distances that make it hard for people to connect. What are some of your recommendations around engaging residents and community members into these types of initiatives?
I think that the share of food and a community meal is perfect. Right? We see this a lot, even just in the work that I'm doing, work with the lovely people at Hesperus. It's a seniors in living facility on this bigger sort of Waldorf campus. And we are talking about ways to get more culturally diverse food onto the plates of these seniors for their lunches every day. Right? And thinking, and we've been really delighted to hear about the fact that these types of initiatives are growing in the region, because wouldn't it make more sense to just pull those folks in, right? And to, and to make those connections with people cooking these kinds of diverse foods. It's really time that we normalize the broader diversity of the people and of the flavors and food that exist in this country, in this province, in this city. We need to, like, so much of my hospital work, and I'm going on a tangent here a little bit, but to see when I arrived that the menu in Scarborough, right? It was the Scarborough Hospital, and we know exactly the cultural makeup of that community. It was beef stroganoff and chicken cordon bleu, right? It is, when we think about healing, the people, but dal and rice would have been a better offer, a bowl of congee would have been a much more suitable thing to offer these folks. And so I think that the spirit of that needs to translate to communities, particularly marginalized communities and newcomer communities, right? York Region is full of, there's large newcomer communities from a wide variety. And I actually did some cooking work with some of these folks. And it was like, it felt really important for me to be able to say to them, please keep all of your flavor and your traditions. We need them all. That is part of what's going to make this country as great as we say that it is, right? That we need all of those. Don't abandon it. So if we finding grassroots opportunities, even if it just is a weekly community meal somewhere in a gym or in a park where you have a roster of different folks cooking to introduce people to flavors and food, that would be a huge win. Right? And that, like, I don't know, man, that is, I think, got to be the province of this country. And so maybe there's a chance for us to chat offside a bit more about this, but I really do think that there's worth investing in, because the thing too is that culturally diverse foods don't just exist for those cultural communities, right? Everybody loves a good blank, you know what I mean? Everybody, all awesome pierogies, killer, jerk chicken roti. Yes, man, we all can get excited about it. The curries are not just for the Indian people, you know what I mean? And so I would really invest a lot of my thinking and my time in that, because then we start thinking about faraway foods made with local ingredients, right? And there's a deeper sustainability connection there. That is the stuff that gets my heart racing, I'll tell you.
So Josh, I knew we were going to need a lot longer with you. I have
Right?
a comment.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Janice has a comment she'd like you to speak to, and then we have one more question before we wrap up. So Janice wrote in 2015, she wrote about self-sufficiency in towns based on grids. Each town should have fresh produce from farm to consumer, omitting large stores, and have import food stations per town grid. Money goes directly to farmers, consumers saves on costly food, and corporations aren't the only ones making profits. So she said a lot there. So if you want to comment on that.
I love the idea. I read that piece as it cruised past in the chat, and any opportunity that we can have to untangle these monopolies that exist and to diversify where resources are going, the fact that we can start spreading more wealth at the grassroots level as opposed to being forced into these really sort of, singular profit-driven structures, the better, right? I think that we need, unfortunately, one of the things that the pandemic did uncover was the degree to which we have taken our eye off of the ball, right? With particularly with regards to our food system, right? There's been generations of deprioritized negligence around our food and food access, and so this is the time to, I think, revisit those things that earlier versions of us wrote. Right? There's wisdom and there's direction there. Maybe it just needs a little bit of an update, right, around climate. I think climate change stuff and that sort of stuff needs to be added into that thinking. But I am all like, if we previous versions have done the work, let's pull that thinking up and let's just like update it so that it makes sense for who we are at this time in history. But I think one of the smartest things we can do is recognize that this is about our entire relationship with food and how important we think it is, how we understand the role that it plays in our lives, is for sure the place that we have to start.
Okay, two more quick comments we'd like you to make. One on backyard gardeners growing things like herbs and garlic. So that's another idea how to leverage that. And also from the long-term care sector, because they've been through so much in the last year for sure, but even before that. Any insights on applying food first approaches or culture change necessary within that sector around food and nutrition and the different.
Yep. So the LTC stuff, my goodness. Yes, 100%. It is a shocking disaster what is happening. Never mind the deep disrespect to our aging, to our grandmothers and grandfathers and our older folks. And I mean, obviously in LTCs, there is the deeper connection between health and food, right? And really thinking about, right now, the food that is served there is the cheapest possible thing that they can produce. Nobody is thinking at all what these older bodies actually need, right? What can actually keep older bodies feeling vital and healthy and connected. It is just when the priority is to make money, right? Everything goes to the side. If the priority is actually to nourish people and to take care of people, we have a completely different attitude about it all. And this is really where this value shift starts playing in, right? Unfortunately, the only values that really underpin so much of our institutional food service is contract compliance and the lowest possible price, right? That's more important than people's health and the health of our farms and that really is the reality that we're living in right now. And so untangling that seems to be easily the first step that we have to take.
With that, I think we're going to have to leave our Q&A, but if we have any other questions that come through, we'll definitely get back to folks with some answers. I just want to say thank you once again, Joshna, for your incredible insight. And I wanted to say to those who are still on the call that Monday, June 7th will be a follow-up event to this event from 12 to 1. So we're trying to focus in on the food time, lunch time for everyone. We want to really dive a little deeper on what the food infrastructure in York Region could look like in order to create more of these equitable opportunities. And also to really support a diverse and well-paid sector, so that we know women have been particularly hit hard during COVID, racialized women, people in the food sector, and we know that there needs to be a lot more done, and this is one way to do that. So this is a win-win when we're talking about diversity, local food, healthy food. So we want to really spend some time looking at that and how the intentional use of social procurement dollars that are already going to be spent on food anyway, can be better used and more intentionally used to create what we've been talking about here today. So you'll get more information about the event coming up on the 7th. Also, please know that when we send this information out, you can subscribe to our Reimagining a Just Recovery campaign newsletter. And we've also put out a call to action for those who would like to join our advisory committee. This work is so important that this is the time for us to really reimagine things, and we can do a lot of great things with one initiative. We can create better jobs, we can address food and income security, we can make sure that everybody in York Region has access to local, healthy, and amazing tasting foods from all around the world, right here in our own backyard. So thank you to everyone for joining and for staying with us throughout your lunchtime. I look forward to the recording being available, and we'd love to hear from you if you weren't able to connect with us throughout the time today. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.